evil creatures that are out to drag us away from what is right. And so in this process of trying to use our freedom well, of working at turning away from sin, we are called to form our conscience, to form our sense of what is right and what is wrong. We will go through this much more in depth. If you look at the Catholicism for Dummies, you'll find a rather extended portion that treats this kind of thing, right and wrong, commandments, how they work, good things, bad things, sin, not sin, all of that stuff. They treat it at length. We're going to go back through that when we get closer to the spring and go through it at more length. But an important part of this process of living in communion with God, of living as a disciple, is the formation in what is right and what is wrong. And again, I think we have to do well to recognize that we're not always very good at it because sin scares us, because it's difficult, because it hits close to home. And sometimes it's like if you learn about right and wrong and you learn about what you're doing, it's like, oh, I do that. It means it's a sin. Like, that's not good. I feel guilty. I don't want to feel guilty. Therefore, it's not a sin. Easy solution, right? But it's not quite how it works, because we have a nature that's given to us. We have something from God that we don't get to choose. You can't decide to eat tree bark. You can try, but it doesn't work. Tree bark is not human food. If you're a deer, you can eat tree bark, but not a human. Well, that may be a little bit more true, but even then, I doubt it is much caloric content, because human bodies don't process cellulose, which is why it's called, it's a kind of fiber. What kind of fiber is it? Oh, what do they call it? I should know this. Insoluble fiber. That's it. So, life in virtue. What we're aiming at is repeated actions in the right direction. Sometimes, especially at first, it's good to think of it a bit like lifting weights. I'm not a weightlifter. Are any of you weightlifters? A little bit. The first time you lift weights, does it ever feel good? No. If you haven't done it for a long time, does it feel good? No. Remember that when it comes to virtue. Remember that when it comes to the spiritual life, that if you haven't done it before, if you haven't done it often, it's not going to feel good right away, most of the time. You have to learn to work through that. This is why most of the world is not runners. Because if you decide that you want to learn to run, the first 3 weeks are misery, and stuff hurts, and it hurts a lot, and your flesh is screaming, and you try running and your lungs are like, I can't breathe, I'm gonna die, you need to stop running now. That never really goes away. But it takes a long time to work through that. If you actually work through it, you get to a place where your body releases like truckloads of endorphins, and it's kind of like a drug high, but you don't develop resistance to it, and you feel really good. And it's really, really bananas that you don't believe from the outside, but you can feel better at the end of like an 8-mile run or a 10-mile run than you felt at the beginning. It's actually real. That happens. But it's very, very few people that work through that initial several-week phase when everything hurts a lot, because it's not good. But that same kind of lesson applies so much to the spiritual life that it isn't funny. And I think it applies to parenthood. Sometimes as a parent, you have to know what is good for your children, and you can't always listen to them. Like some skills you just got to learn. I would argue like swimming is one of them. I don't care if you're afraid of the water. Like it's good to learn how to swim. That gives you a capacity. And so as a parent, like yes, you want to be gentle, but sometimes the most loving thing you can do is strap water wings on them, give them a life jacket, and throw them in. And they might scream. And you can jump in after them and keep them safe. You don't have to let them flail alone. It doesn't have to be a horrible experience. But sometimes you just have to know that there are things that you have to learn. And it doesn't really matter as a parent if the child wants to learn it or not. It's like, no, this is how life works. You don't get to decide if you want to be potty trained or not. That's not a thing. Like, you need to figure this out. And lots of other things, going to bed on time and, eating right. And there's a ton of different things that fit in that category. And when it comes to Christianity, this is so real. Virtue is hard. If you haven't done it at first, you're going to feel like it's the wrong path. The muscles are sore. It's not going to have the feel-good kind of effect right away most of the time. I try to tell people that, we live in a culture, for instance, that isn't very intellectual, that isn't committed to learning. And people's, mental wheels kind of get rusty after school. And so what happens is you read a book and it's hard to follow or it's hard to understand, and you quit reading and put it away and I have better things to do with my time and go on and do something else, right? But again, intellectually, if you haven't used your mind like that for a while, it's probably going to feel rusty at first. That doesn't mean it's the wrong choice all the time or a bad thing to do. So in this path, Catholicism, the scriptures kind of define what are called the 4 cardinal virtues. They also come out of certain strands of philosophy, and the 3 theological virtues. This stuff, I would say, is all over the tradition. You'll find it if you look in the Catechism, their commentary on virtue, they dive right into these things. The 4 cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Prudence is the ability to know what is the right thing and to do it. So prudence is sort of the mother of all virtues. Prudence is the heart of it. Prudence is the ability to know what is right in the right situation at the right time and to do it. Justice is giving another person what is due them. And this is a high bar, because what is due them as a child of God, as someone created in his image and likeness, as someone created for glory. And we live in a culture that lots of people don't think of themselves as created for glory. They think of themselves as the sum of random evolution, and that life doesn't have meaning and there's not greater purpose. And yet we're still called to treat them with dignity and respect, even if they don't believe it of themselves. Part of the commitment to taking care of the poor, part of the commitment to social work and justice and those kind of things comes from that. Fortitude can also be called courage. It's the ability to stand fast when things are challenging. Very needed virtue, because sometimes the challenging thing is the right one. And temperance is like the moderation of desire. This is something that we all need to exercise. You know that if you ate everything that you wanted to, would you ever reach the end of your desire? No, you wouldn't. Desire doesn't get lessened. It just goes on and on and on and on. If you think of money, you want to have a bank account with $10,000 in it. And once you have 10,000, you want 20. And once you have 20, you want 40. And, on and on and on. And you start to realize in some cases, I was thinking about this the other day. Finances are one of the difficulties that I have. I don't know, it gets under my skin really fast. And it's like, I think if I had $100 million in the bank, I'd want 200. And if I had 200, I'd want 4. Because, you just might need a little more, who knows? And I don't know why that just kind of happens, but it does. So prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance, theological virtues. This kind of gets me a little bit. This is a good thing, probably for you guys to hear. So theological virtues, the tradition would say that they are infused by God and given to us at baptism. But I would argue, for instance, that there is a kind of natural faith. It's not theological faith when you hit a light switch that the lights turn on. That's natural faith. And there's a way that you have natural hope and natural love as well, right? They're not all just from God. Dogs, for instance, demonstrate a kind of love. It's not human love. It's not the same thing, but it's a kind of love. And I think it's a little bit easy to minimize that. But Catechism argues, I think you can even make a decent proposal that St. Paul talks about faith, hope, and love. And he says, love is the greatest of these because in heaven, faith and hope disappear. In heaven, you have no more hope and you have no more faith, which is kind of strange to think about. But it's because faith is a belief in things that you have to choose to believe in. In heaven, you see the reality. So in heaven, faith gives place to sight. And hope for a better future, there's no better future because in heaven, you have it all. You have the satisfaction of all desire. You have everything you could ever dream of, and you have it forever. And so love is the greatest of these. And I think it's good to see that there's a kind of natural love of parents and children. There's a part of human nature that's involved there. And then there are supernatural degrees of love. There's times where you maybe have seen people love supernaturally, and it can be really beautiful. It's incredible to see, situations that are tragedies bring this out sometimes, One of the really, really heartbreaking things that I think I've encountered is when you see a person come to a food bank to get food that they need, and sometimes they'll ask for a little bit extra, and you ask them the story, and they say, well, there's a friend who lives, a ways away from me, and he's even worse off than I am, but he won't come and ask, so I'm going to give this to him, and I'll be okay. With this little bit. That's a kind of supernatural love. That's pretty cool when you see it. It's kind of heartbreaking because, there's a lot of sadness and loss in human society. But those are the cardinal and the theological virtues. So the idea of this is that we're created for not just happiness, happiness in this world, for a kind of emotional feeling. We're created for beatitude. We're created for glory. We're created for communion and life with God. That life with God is a life of love. And that love we're meant to live in communion with by following a way of life, a way of living. That way of living involves things like discipline. It involves reckoning with our need for conversion. It involves, fighting against temptation. It involves virtue and practice. It involves all of these different things. We have to work to be formed in what is true and good and holy. And we have to try and do it. And I think that it takes a lot of support from the community as well. It's not easy. It's a hard path. But it is ultimately a path that is leading us to glory, that is leading us toward Jesus. And this is sort of the foundational piece of morality. When we think of what choosing the good means, when we think of avoiding the bad, not choosing the way of sin and choosing what is good and holy, this is kind of the purpose. This is the deep logic or the deep meaning of it all, what we're aiming at. It gets a little bit more complicated when we start talking about how we judge the morality of actions and how we start thinking about things, but this is the foundational piece. So I hope that made